Flynn Baker's calloused hands tightened around the steering wheel of his weathered pickup truck. As he caught a glimpse of the woman in his rearview mirror, she was running in heels. Her expensive coat flapping behind her, terror etched across her face as a dark figure pursued her through the empty parking garage. "Daddy, what's that lady doing?" 7-year-old Maddie asked from her booster seat, peering through the back window with curious eyes. "I don't know, sweetheart," Flynn murmured, but instinct told him something was very wrong. The parking garage was nearly empty at this late hour, the overhead lights casting long shadows as the woman frantically looked around for help. Making a split-second decision, Flynn put the truck in reverse, backing up toward the woman. He rolled down the passenger window. "Need help?" He called out, the woman elegant even in her panicked state, with chestnut hair falling from what had once been a neat bun, locked eyes with him. "Please," she gasped, glancing back at the man who was now only 20 yards behind her. "Get in," Flynn said, reaching across to push open the door. She didn't hesitate, diving into the passenger seat and slamming the door. "Drive, please drive," she panted, ducking down as Flynn accelerated toward the exit. "Is that man chasing you?" Maddie asked, leaning forward in her seat. The woman turned, seeming to notice the child for the first time. Her eyes widened slightly, but she forced a trembling smile. "Yes, he is. I'm Grace Lawson. Thank you for stopping." Flynn nodded, navigating through the garage exit and turning quickly onto the main road. "Flynn Baker," he replied, checking his mirrors to confirm they weren't being followed. "And this is my daughter, Maddie." "Hi, Miss Grace," Maddie said, waving. "Your necklace is pretty." Grace's hand went to the delicate pendant at her throat. "Thank you, Maddie," she said softly before turning to Flynn. "I'm so sorry to involve you both in this. If you could just drop me at the nearest police station." "That man was scary," Maddie observed. "He looked really angry." Flynn met Grace's eyes briefly. "Stalker?" he asked quietly. Grace nodded, the professional composure she was trying to maintain cracking slightly. "Former employee. He's been escalating for weeks. Tonight he was waiting in the parking garage after everyone else had left." She shuddered. "I didn't think he'd actually try to," she broke off, glancing at Maddie. "Hey, princess," Flynn said, meeting his daughter's eyes in the rearview mirror. "Can you count all the red cars you see? I bet you can't find 10 before we get to the police station." As Maddie eagerly began her counting game, Flynn lowered his voice. "Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" "No, I'm fine," Grace whispered, composing herself. "Just shaken. I've filed reports before, but the police say they can't do anything until he actually—" Her voice trailed off. Flynn frowned, noting the dark circles under her eyes barely concealed by makeup. Whoever this woman was, she'd been dealing with this for a while. "We'll get you to the station. They can at least take a report about tonight." "Thank you," Grace said, straightening her coat. "I don't usually accept rides from strangers, but desperate times," Flynn finished for her. "Don't worry about it." 7, Maddie called from the back seat. "I found 7 red cars, Daddy." Grace turned to offer the child a more genuine smile. "Good job, Maddie. I see another one up ahead." As they drove to the police station, Flynn couldn't help noticing Grace's quick, efficient movements as she fixed her hair and straightened her clothes, preparing herself to be taken seriously by the authorities. There was something about her that spoke of boardrooms and executive decisions, a stark contrast to his own world of construction sites and single parenthood. At the station, Flynn parked but hesitated before turning off the engine. "Would you like us to come in with you?" Sometimes having witnesses helps. Grace paused, her hand on the door handle. "You would do that. You've already done so much." 8, Maddie announced triumphantly. "I found 8 red cars." Flynn smiled at his daughter's excitement. "Great job, princess. Now we need to help Miss Grace talk to some police officers. Can you be my super helper?" Maddie nodded solemnly. "I can tell them about the scary man." Grace looked between father and daughter, something softening in her expression. "I would appreciate the support, if you're sure it's not too much trouble." Inside the station, Flynn watched as Grace transformed. Despite her disheveled appearance, she commanded attention, her voice firm as she explained the situation to the desk sergeant. When he seemed dismissive, mentioning that without physical contact they couldn't do much, Flynn stepped forward. "I witnessed this man chasing her through a parking garage," he stated. "He was running after her with clear intent. That's attempted assault at minimum." The sergeant looked at him more carefully. "And you are Flynn Baker. I was leaving work with my daughter when we saw this happening." Maddie, holding Flynn's hand tightly, nodded. "The man looked really mean," she added helpfully. Something about the child's innocent confirmation seemed to affect the sergeant. He sighed and pushed the report form toward Grace. "Fill this out. I'll have an officer take your statement." An hour later, they were finished. Grace had given her statement. Flynn had provided his witness account, and even Maddie had solemnly told a kind female officer what she had seen. But despite the officer's sympathetic demeanor, the reality was clear. Without more evidence or an actual assault, there was little they could do beyond documenting the incident. Outside the station, Grace stood uncertainly on the sidewalk. "Thank you both so much," she said, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine gratitude. "I can call a car service from here." Flynn frowned, looking at his watch. It was nearly 9:30 p.m., past Maddie's bedtime, and the temperature had dropped considerably. "Where are you headed?" "We can give you a ride." Grace hesitated. I can't go back to my apartment. He knows where I live. I was going to get a hotel room for tonight." "Daddy, can Miss Grace come to our house?" Maddie asked, yawning. "She can have pancakes for breakfast. You make the best pancakes." Flynn opened his mouth to gently explain why that wouldn't be appropriate, but the sight of Grace, composed yet clearly exhausted and frightened, made him pause. "I couldn't impose," Grace said quickly. "You've already done too much." "We have a guest room," Flynn found himself saying. "It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and safe. You're welcome to it for tonight, and we can figure things out in the morning." Grace stared at him, clearly weighing her options. "Mr. Baker, Flynn," she amended. "You don't know me. I could be anyone." He smiled slightly. "You're a woman being stalked by a dangerous ex-employee. I'm pretty sure I'm more of a risk to you than you are to me." "Miss Grace, are you coming for pancakes?" Maddie asked sleepily from beside her father. Grace looked at the little girl, then back at Flynn. Something in her expression shifted. "If you're absolutely sure it's not an imposition, then yes, just for tonight, and I insist on paying you." "Not necessary," Flynn said firmly, leading them back to his truck. "Maddie and I are happy to help, aren't we, Princess?" "Yep," Maddie confirmed, climbing into her booster seat. "And Daddy makes chocolate chip pancakes on Saturdays." As they drove through the quiet streets of Portland, Grace gazed out the window, occasionally checking behind them as if expecting to see her stalker's car. Flynn respected her silence, focusing on the road while Maddie dozed in the back seat. When they pulled up to the modest two-bedroom house in a middle-class neighborhood, Grace seemed to take in every detail: the neatly maintained yard, the porch light Flynn had forgotten to turn on that morning, the child's bicycle leaning against the side of the house. "It's not much," Flynn said as he carried a sleeping Maddie toward the front door, "but it's home." "It's lovely," Grace replied, and something in her tone made Flynn believe she meant it. Inside, Flynn gave Grace a quick tour while carrying Maddie. The house was small but tidy: a living room with worn but comfortable furniture, a compact kitchen with dishes drying in the rack, and two bedrooms down a short hallway. "Guest rooms here," Flynn said, nodding toward the door. "Bathrooms across the hall. Let me just put Maddie to bed, and I'll get you some towels and whatever else you need." Grace nodded, looking slightly overwhelmed as she stood in the hallway. Flynn carried Maddie to her room, quickly helping his sleepy daughter change into pajamas and brush her teeth before tucking her in. "Is Miss Grace going to be okay, Daddy?" Maddie asked drowsily as he kissed her forehead. "Yes, Princess, she's safe here with us." "Good," Maddie murmured. "I like her, she's pretty." Flynn smiled. "Go to sleep now, I love you. Love you too, Daddy." When Flynn returned to the hallway, he found Grace standing exactly where he'd left her, as if afraid to move without permission. The powerful CEO he'd glimpsed at the police station seemed to have vanished, replaced by a woman who looked exhausted and uncertain. "Are you hungry?" he asked gently. "I could make you something simple." Grace shook her head. "No, thank you, She took a deep breath. "I just realized I have nothing with me: no clothes, no toiletries, not even my phone charger." "I have spare toothbrushes," Flynn assured her, "and I can lend you a t-shirt to sleep in." "As for the charger, what kind of phone do you have?" "iPhone," Flynn nodded. Maddie has an iPad, same charger, I'll get you everything you need. 15 minutes later, Grace was settled in the guest room with clean towels, a new toothbrush, one of Flynn's t-shirts that would fit her like a nightgown, and a phone charger. Before leaving her to rest, Flynn hesitated at the door. I understand if you're still uneasy, he said. The lock on this door works, and you're welcome to use it. My room's at the end of the hall if you need anything. Grace's eyes met his, searching for something. Whatever she found seemed to reassure her. Thank you, Flynn. Not just for this, she gestured around the room, but for stopping tonight, for believing me, for bringing Maddie to the station to help me. I don't know what would have happened if. No need to think about that, Flynn said firmly. Get some rest. Things will look clearer in the morning. As he closed the door, Flynn found himself wondering what kind of woman Grace Lawson really was beneath her professional exterior. He'd noticed her designer clothes, the quality of her watch, the way she'd addressed the police officers with quiet authority. Whoever she was from a different world than his, a world far removed from construction work and struggling to make ends meet as a single dad. Shaking his head, Flynn headed to his own room. Tomorrow, he'd help Grace figure out her next steps, and then their paths would diverge. That was all there was to it. Morning came with the sound of giggling from the kitchen. Flynn opened his eyes, momentarily disoriented by the unusual noise before remembering their guest. Glancing at his clock, he saw it was just after 7 later than he usually slept on Saturdays. Quickly throwing on jeans and a fresh t-shirt, Flynn made his way down the hallway toward the sounds of his daughter's laughter and the unexpected smell of coffee brewing. The sight that greeted him in the kitchen made him pause in the doorway. Grace, wearing his oversized t-shirt with her work slacks from yesterday, was standing at the counter with Maddie perched on a step stool beside her. They were mixing something in a bowl, and Maddie's face was streaked with what looked like flour. Make sure to get all the lumps out, Grace was saying, guiding Maddie's hand with the whisk. That's how you get fluffy pancakes. I'm the best mixer, Maddie declared proudly. Daddy always lets me mix. He's a smart man then, Grace replied with a smile, looking more relaxed than she had the night before despite her makeshift outfit. Flynn cleared his throat and both turned toward him. Daddy, Maddie exclaimed. Miss Grace is teaching me how to make special pancakes. They have banana in them. I hope you don't mind, Grace said, suddenly looking uncertain. Maddie woke up early and found me in the kitchen. I thought I'd make breakfast as a thank you, but then she wanted to help and… She puts banana in the pancakes, Daddy, Maddie interrupted. And they're still gonna have chocolate chips too, Flynn smiled, entering the kitchen fully. I don't mind at all. It's nice to have someone else cook for a change. He headed for the coffee pot. Though I didn't expect you to be up so early after everything that happened last night. Grace's expression flickered briefly. I don't sleep much these days, she admitted quietly before turning back to the pancake batter. But I'm feeling much better this morning. Amazing what a safe place to sleep can do. Flynn poured himself coffee, noting that Grace had found the good beans he saved for special occasions. Any plans for today? He asked carefully. For what happens next, I mean. Grace met his eyes over Maddie's head. I've been thinking about that. I need to get some clothes and essentials, but I'm not sure about going back to my apartment. She lowered her voice. I don't want to put you two at risk, but I also don't know where else to go right now. Hotels aren't secure. He could bribe staff to get my room number. You can stay here another night if you need to, Flynn offered before he could think better of it. Maddie and I don't have big plans this weekend. We're going to the park, Maddie corrected him. You promised, Daddy. Right, the park, Flynn amended. Not exactly a packed social calendar. Grace looked between them, conflict clear in her expression. That's incredibly generous, but I can't keep imposing. Maybe I could hire some security, go to my apartment with them. Miss Grace, you should come to the park with us, Maddie suggested, looking up from her mixing. We feed the ducks and play on the swings, and sometimes Daddy lets me have ice cream if I don't tell Grandma. Flynn gave his daughter a mock stern look. I think you just told on me, Princess. Maddie giggled, then turned serious eyes to Grace. Are you still scared of that mean man? Grace hesitated, clearly weighing how honest to be with a child. A little bit, she admitted, but I feel much safer now, thanks to you and your dad. Then you should stay here where it's safe, Maddie declared with the simple logic of childhood, and come to the park with us. The ducks are really nice. Flynn watched as Grace's professional resolve visibly weakened in the face of Maddie's innocent concern. The park does sound nice, she said softly. Great, Maddie exclaimed. Now we need to cook these pancakes before they get sad. As they ate breakfast together, Flynn couldn't help noticing how naturally Grace fit into their small kitchen. She'd somehow managed to elevate his simple pancake recipe into something spectacular, and the way she engaged with Maddie asking questions about school and friends without talking down to her showed a genuine interest that touched him. These are incredible, Flynn admitted after his first bite. What did you do to them? Just added banana and a touch of cinnamon, Grace said, looking pleased at his reaction. My grandmother taught me. She said food should always have a little surprise in it. Well, your grandmother was a genius, Flynn declared, making Grace smile. As they cleared the breakfast dishes together, Flynn decided to broach the subject that had been nagging at him since the night before. Grace, can I ask what you do? For work, I mean. Grace paused, a dish towel in her hands. I'm the CEO of Lawson Tech Solutions. We develop security software for corporate networks. Flynn nearly dropped the plate he was rinsing. You're that Grace Lawson, the one who was on the cover of Business Weekly last month, she nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable. Yes, does that change things? Flynn shook his head quickly. No, of course not. Well, it explains a lot. About your stalker, I mean. You're a public figure. Unfortunately, Grace agreed, resuming her drying. Daniel, my stalker, was in our engineering department, brilliant coder but with serious boundary issues. When I had to let him go for inappropriate behavior, he became fixated on the idea that I'd ruined his career because of a personal vendetta. And the police still won't help, Flynn asked incredulously. Grace sighed. They say without direct threats or physical contact, their hands are tied. He's careful, sends messages that could be interpreted multiple ways, shows up places where he has plausible reasons to be. She set down the towel. Last night was the first time he's been so obvious, actually chasing me. But even then, he could claim he was just trying to talk to me, that I misinterpreted his intentions. Flynn frowned, thinking of how terrified she'd looked running through that parking garage. That's ridiculous. Anyone could see he meant to harm you. Welcome to being a woman in a position of power, Grace said with a wry smile. Half the world thinks you don't deserve to be there, and the other half is waiting for you to fail. She glanced toward the living room where Maddie was now watching Saturday morning cartoons. Sorry, I don't mean to sound bitter. Flynn studied her, seeing beyond the CEO to the woman underneath, someone who carried heavy responsibilities and faced challenges he could barely imagine. You've earned the right to a little bitterness, he said quietly. Grace's expression softened. Thank you for understanding. Now, about today, are you sure it's okay if I tag along to the park? I don't want to intrude on your time with Maddie. She clearly wants you to come, Flynn pointed out. And honestly, it might be good for you to get some fresh air and normal activity after last night. Normal activity sounds wonderful, Grace admitted, though I'm not exactly dressed for the park. She gestured to her wrinkled work clothes. Flynn thought for a moment. My sister left some clothes here last time she visited. She's about your size. They're nothing fancy, but they'd be more comfortable than what you have. 30 minutes later, Grace emerged from the guest room wearing a pair of jeans that were slightly too long, a simple blue t-shirt, and a zippered hoodie. She'd pulled her hair into a casual ponytail, and without her professional makeup, she looked younger and more vulnerable. I feel like I'm in disguise, she said with a small laugh. No one who knows me would recognize me like this. That might be a good thing right now, Flynn pointed out. Less chance of your stalker spotting you. Miss Grace, you look pretty, Maddie declared, running up to inspect the transformation. You look like a regular mom now, Flynn winced. Maddie, that's the nicest compliment I've received in a long time, Grace finished, smiling at the little girl. Thank you, Maddie. As they headed out to the truck, Flynn couldn't help noticing how different Grace looked in casual clothes, softer somehow, less guarded. It was also impossible not to notice how the borrowed jeans hugged her curves in a way her business attire had concealed. Catching himself staring, Flynn quickly focused on helping Maddie into her booster seat. So, Washington Park, he asked once they were all settled in the truck. There's the duck pond, playgrounds, the rose garden. I haven't been there in years, Grace said, looking genuinely excited. Not since I moved back to Portland to take over the company. How long ago was that? Flynn asked, pulling out of the driveway. Almost 3 years, Grace replied. After my father died, I left my job in Seattle to keep the family business going. That must have been difficult, Flynn said, navigating through their neighborhood. Grace was quiet for a moment. It was. I wasn't prepared to lose him so suddenly and stepping into his role while grieving. She trailed off, then glanced back at Maddie, clearly reluctant to discuss death in front of the child. I understand, Flynn said simply. And he understood loss and unexpected responsibility all too well. The park was busy with weekend visitors, but not overwhelmingly crowded. As they walked from the parking area toward the duck pond, Maddie skipped ahead, occasionally stopping to examine interesting rocks or fallen leaves. She's wonderful, Grace remarked, watching Maddie with a smile. So curious and full of energy. Flynn nodded, his eyes following his daughter. She's my whole world, has been since her mother left when she was 2. Grace looked at him with surprise. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were a single parent. That must be challenging with your work schedule. Construction supervisor, Flynn explained. The hours can be tough, but my boss is pretty understanding about school pickups and sick days. My mother helps out sometimes too, he shrugged. We make it work. More than work, Grace said warmly. Maddie is clearly thriving. You should be proud. Something about the genuine admiration in her voice made Flynn stand a little straighter. What about you? Any children? Grace shook her head. No, my 20s and early 30s were spent building my career. Then when I finally felt established enough to consider a family, my father died and I took over Lawson Tech. She sighed. Dating as a female CEO is complicated. Most men are either intimidated by my position or only interested in my money and connections. Their loss, Flynn said simply. Grace looked at him with surprise, but before she could respond, Maddie called out from the edge of the pond. Daddy, Miss Grace, the ducks are waiting for their breakfast. Flynn reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small paper bag. Whole grain bread, he explained to Grace. The park rangers say it's better for the ducks than white bread. You come prepared, Grace noted with a smile. Occupational hazard of being a dad. I've got Band-Aids, wet wipes, and a spare hair tie in here too, he said, patting his pocket. They spent the next hour feeding ducks, exploring the park paths, and watching Maddie conquer the playground equipment. Flynn couldn't help noticing how Grace gradually relaxed, her laughter becoming more frequent and her gestures more animated as the morning progressed. When Maddie declared herself absolutely starving, they found a food cart selling hot dogs and pretzels. I can't remember the last time I had a hot dog in the park, Grace admitted as they settled on a bench with their simple lunch. Probably not since college. What do you usually do on weekends? Maddie asked, already halfway through her hot dog. Grace considered the question. Work mostly, or attend charity functions and business dinners. She looked slightly embarrassed. Not very exciting, I'm afraid. That sounds boring, Maddie declared with childhood frankness. You should do fun things too, Maddie, Flynn admonished gently. That's not polite. It's okay, Grace said, smiling at the little girl. Maddie's right, I don't do enough fun things. She took a bite of her hot dog. This is much better than the charity gala I was supposed to attend tonight. Flynn raised an eyebrow. You're missing a gala because of us, Grace shook her head. Because of Daniel, really. I wouldn't have felt safe there, too many people, too easy for him to blend in. She sighed. I should probably call my assistant and let her know I won't be attending, but my phone died last night and I forgot to charge it. You can use mine, Flynn offered, pulling out his well-worn smartphone. Thank you. Grace took the phone, hesitating before asking, would it be all right if I made a few calls? There are some people who might be worried. Take your time, Flynn assured her, turning his attention to Maddie, who was attempting to catch a falling leaf. Grace stepped away to make her calls, and Flynn watched as she paced slowly along the path. Even in borrowed jeans and a ponytail, there was something unmistakably elegant about her, a confidence in the way she carried herself that spoke of boardrooms and important decisions. When she returned a few minutes later, her expression was troubled. I hate to cut our day short, but I need to figure out my next steps. My assistant says Daniel called the office multiple times last night looking for me, and he showed up this morning claiming he needed to return my property. Flynn frowned. That doesn't sound good. No, Grace agreed, handing back his phone. My assistant turned him away, but he's clearly escalating. I need to decide where to go from here. Security team, restraining order, maybe even temporarily relocating. Do you want to head back to the house? Flynn asked. You can make calls from there, figure things out. Grace looked at Maddie, who was now happily watching a squirrel dart up a nearby tree. I don't want to ruin your day at the park. You're not ruining anything, Flynn assured her. Maddie and I come here all the time. Her safety and yours is more important than a few more hours of duck feeding. Grace's eyes softened. Thank you. Again, Flynn called to Maddie, explaining that they needed to head home a bit early. To his surprise, she didn't protest, instead asking, Is Miss Grace's mean man looking for her again? Grace knelt down to Maddie's level. Yes, he is, but I'm going to make sure he doesn't find me and that he can't bother anyone else either. Maddie nodded solemnly. Daddy can help. He fixes things all the time. Flynn felt a pang at his daughter's simple faith in him. If only adult problems could be solved as easily as repairing a wobbly table or patching a hole in the wall. Back at the house, Grace borrowed Flynn's laptop to send some emails while he kept Maddie occupied with a board game. He tried not to eavesdrop as Grace made calls from the guest room, but he couldn't help overhearing fragments of conversations about security consultants, temporary restraining orders, and hotel arrangements. When she eventually emerged, her expression was grim. I can't thank you enough for everything, but I think it's time for me to go. I've arranged for a security team to meet me at a hotel downtown. They'll help me get some clothes from my apartment and figure out a longer-term solution. Flynn felt an unexpected disappointment at the thought of her leaving. If that's what you think is best, Grace nodded, though she didn't look entirely convinced. It is. I've imposed on your hospitality long enough, and I need to deal with this situation properly. She glanced toward Maddie, who was arranging game pieces on the living room floor. Besides, I don't want to put either of you at risk. When will they arrive? About an hour, Grace replied. I should change back into my work clothes. Flynn nodded. Of course. Would you like some coffee while you wait? Or I could make lunch. Grace smiled at his awkward offer. Coffee would be wonderful, thank you. While Grace changed, Flynn made fresh coffee and prepared simple sandwiches, his mind racing with thoughts he knew he shouldn't be having. Grace Lawson lived in a different world, one of corporate success and wealth that he couldn't begin to understand. Once she left his modest home, their lives would have no reason to intersect again. When Grace returned to the kitchen wearing her slightly wrinkled business clothes, Flynn was struck by the transformation. The casual, laughing woman from the park was gone, replaced by the poised CEO he'd glimpsed the night before, leaving already. Maddie asked, coming into the kitchen and noticing Grace's outfit. Soon, Grace confirmed, crouching down to the little girl's level. I have to go take care of some grown-up things, but I wanted to thank you for letting me stay in your house and for taking me to meet the ducks. Maddie's lower lip trembled slightly. But what if the mean man finds you? Grace glanced up at Flynn before answering. I'm going to have some special helpers like security guards who will make sure he stays away from me. Like superheroes, Maddie asked hopefully. Something like that, Grace agreed with a small smile, but not as exciting, I'm afraid. Will you come back and visit? Maddie persisted. You make really good pancakes. Grace hesitated, looking uncertain. Maddie, Miss Grace is very busy, Flynn interjected gently. She has an important job to do. But how about we give Miss Grace our phone number? Flynn suggested, recognizing the signs of an impending tantrum. That way, if she wants to let us know how she's doing, she can call. This compromise seemed to satisfy Maddie, who nodded and went to find her favorite crayon to write the number down fancy, like a business card. Left alone with Grace, Flynn felt suddenly awkward. Sorry about that. She gets attached quickly. Please don't apologize, Grace said softly. It's been incredible, actually. Being treated like a normal person, not Grace Lawson, CEO. Spending time with you both has been the most genuine human interaction I've had in months, Flynn wasn't sure how to respond to the vulnerability in her voice. "You're welcome back anytime." "For pancakes or duck feeding or whatever." Grace smiled, though there was a wistfulness to it. "That's a lovely offer, but once this situation is resolved, you'll go back to your life and I'll go back to mine." "Right," Flynn agreed, ignoring the unexpected twinge of disappointment he felt. Of course. They were saved from further awkwardness by Maddie's return, proudly bearing a piece of construction paper with their phone number written in purple crayon, decorated with flowers and what appeared to be several ducks. "Here you go, Miss Grace," Maddie declared, presenting the paper with a flourish. "Now you can call us whenever you want." "This is beautiful, Maddie," Grace said, carefully folding the paper and tucking it into her purse. "I'll keep it safe." A car horn sounded outside and Grace glanced toward the window. "That must be my security team." Flynn walked her to the door, acutely aware that once she stepped outside, the strange interlude of the past 24 hours would end. "Take care of yourself, Grace." "I will," she promised. "Flynn, thank you for everything." On impulse, Grace leaned forward and hugged him briefly, her perfume subtle and expensive lingering as she pulled away. Then she crouched to give Maddie a hug as well. "Be good for your dad," Grace told the little girl, "and keep feeding those ducks." With a final smile and wave, Grace walked to the waiting black SUV. As it pulled away, Flynn felt as though something significant had just slipped through his fingers, something he hadn't even realized he wanted to hold on to. "Is Miss Grace going to be okay, Daddy?" Maddie asked, her small hand slipping into his. Flynn squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Yes, Princess, she has people to help her now." "But not like us," Maddie said with the absolute certainty of a 7-year-old. Flynn smiled down at his daughter. "No, not like us." 3 weeks passed with no word from Grace. Flynn told himself this was expected. She was a busy executive with her own life and problems to solve. The fact that he found himself thinking about her at odd moments, wondering if she was safe, if her stalker had been caught, if she ever thought about them, was just natural concern for someone who had briefly shared their home. He threw himself into work, taking on extra shifts when possible to build up his savings. Summer was approaching, which meant Maddie would soon be out of school, and he needed to budget for day camps and childcare. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when Flynn's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. He was at work, supervising the framing on a new commercial building, and almost didn't answer. "Flynn Baker," he said, stepping away from the noise of the construction site. "Flynn, it's Grace Lawson." Her voice was immediately recognizable, though it sounded strained. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Grace," he repeated, surprised at how hearing her name sent a jolt through him. "No, it's fine. Is everything okay?" There was a pause. "Not exactly. I was wondering if we could talk in person." Flynn frowned at the tension in her voice. "Of course. When? Today, if possible. I know it's asking a lot, especially with Maddie, but Maddie has ballet until 5, then she's going to my mother's for dinner," Flynn said. "I could meet you around 5:30. "That would be perfect," Grace said, the relief evident in her voice. "Where would be convenient for you?" They arranged to meet at a coffee shop midway between his worksite and downtown, and Flynn spent the rest of his shift distracted, wondering what could have prompted Grace to reach out after weeks of silence. At 5:35, Flynn entered the coffee shop, scanning the room for Grace. He spotted her in a corner booth, wearing large sunglasses despite the dim lighting and rainy weather. As he approached, he noticed she looked thinner than she had 3 weeks ago, with dark circles visible beneath the oversized glasses. "Grace," he said quietly, sliding into the booth opposite her. She removed the sunglasses, revealing tired eyes. "Thank you for coming. I ordered you a coffee black with 1 sugar, if I remember correctly." Flynn was touched that she'd remembered his preference from their brief time together. "That's perfect, thanks. What's going on? You look terrible," she supplied with a weak smile. "It's been a difficult few weeks." "Your stalker," Flynn guessed. Grace nodded, wrapping her hands around her own mug. "Daniel, yes, the restraining order only made him more determined. He's become creative in finding ways to let me know he's watching without technically violating the order." Flynn frowned. "What about the security team? They're good, but they can't be with me 24/7, and they're expensive. The company board is already questioning the expense." She sighed. I've been staying at different hotels, working remotely when possible, but it's not sustainable. Flynn studied her, noticing the way her shoulders hunched slightly forward, how her eyes darted to the door each time it opened. This wasn't the confident CEO he'd met in the police station, or even the relaxed woman who'd fed ducks in the park with Maddie. This was someone being worn down by constant fear. "What can I do?" he asked simply. Grace met his eyes, looking simultaneously determined and embarrassed. "This is going to sound ridiculous, and please feel free to say no, but I was wondering if I could stay at your house again." "Just for a few days," Flynn blinked in surprise. "My house? But surely you have better options, friends with security systems, upscale buildings with doormen." "That's just it," Grace explained. "Daniel knows my world. He knows my friends, my usual hotels, my patterns. What he doesn't know is you." She leaned forward. "The 2 nights I spent at your house were the only time I've felt truly safe since this all started. He has no connection to you, no way of finding that address." Flynn considered her request. "What about your security team?" "I'd keep them for transportation to and from work, but reduce the hours." She hesitated. "I know it's an enormous imposition. I'd compensate you, of course, and I wouldn't be in the way. You and Maddie wouldn't even know I was there." Something in Flynn rebelled at the idea of Grace hiding away in his guest room like some shameful secret. "That's not how it works in my house," he said firmly. "If you stay with us, you're part of the household. You eat meals with us, spend time with us." Grace looked startled. "I didn't mean to suggest, I know," Flynn interrupted gently. "But Maddie would be confused if you were there, but keeping your distance. That's not the kind of environment I want for her." Grace nodded slowly. "You're right, I wasn't thinking clearly." "Maybe this was a mistake. I didn't say no," Flynn clarified. "I'm just saying if you stay with us, you stay with us, not as a paying guest hiding in the spare room." Hope flickered across Grace's face. "You'd really let me stay, even knowing the potential risk." Flynn considered this. "Do you think he could trace you to us?" Grace shook her head firmly. "No, I've been extremely careful. I took a circuitous route here, and I'll do the same when we leave. I haven't told anyone about you, not even my assistant knows where I stayed that night." Flynn made his decision. "Then yes, you can stay. Maddie will be thrilled. She's asked about you at least a dozen times." "She has." Grace looked genuinely touched. Flynn nodded, smiling slightly. "She tells everyone about our friend who's being chased by a mean man." "The checkout lady at the grocery store knows the whole story." Grace winced. "I hope that doesn't cause problems. In Maddie's version, you're a princess being chased by a dragon, so I think your identity is safe," Flynn assured her with a chuckle. For the first time since he'd arrived, Grace genuinely smiled. "Thank you, Flynn. I can't tell you what this means to me." "When do you want to move in?" he asked, already mentally rearranging his schedule to accommodate their unexpected house guest. "Is tonight too soon?" Grace asked hesitantly. "I have a small suitcase in my car with essentials." Flynn nodded. "Tonight is fine. I need to pick up Maddie from my mother's at 7, but we could meet at the house after that." They worked out the logistics, with Grace insisting on taking a separate, roundabout route to ensure she wasn't followed. As they prepared to leave the coffee shop, Grace suddenly reached across the table and squeezed Flynn's hand. "I know this is strange," she said softly. "A CEO you barely know asking to hide in your house from her stalker. If our positions were reversed, I'm not sure I'd say yes." Flynn turned his hand to briefly return the squeeze. "Good thing they're not reversed then." When Flynn arrived home with Maddie, the little girl was already half asleep, worn out from ballet and dinner with her grandmother. He carried her inside, helped her through her bedtime routine, and tucked her in, promising that a special surprise would be waiting in the morning. Grace arrived shortly after, slipping quietly through the front door with a single rolling suitcase and a laptop bag. She changed into jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail again, the disguise that wasn't really a disguise, just Grace without the CEO armor. "Maddie's already asleep," Flynn told her as he showed her to the guest room. "I told her there'd be a surprise tomorrow morning. I hope she's not disappointed when the surprise is just me," Grace said with a small smile. "Trust me, she'll be ecstatic," Flynn assured her. "Do you need anything else tonight?" Grace shook her head. "You've done more than enough. Thank you, Flynn. Truly." As Flynn headed to his own room, he wondered what he'd gotten himself into. Harboring a CEO on the run from her stalker wasn't exactly how he'd planned to spend his spring. But the relief in Grace's eyes when he'd agreed to help had made the decision feel right, despite the complications it might bring. The next morning, Flynn was awakened by Maddie's excited shriek from the hallway. "Miss Grace, Daddy, Miss Grace is back." By the time he stumbled out of his bedroom, Maddie had already dragged a laughing Grace to the kitchen and was breathlessly explaining all the things they needed to do together, starting with banana pancakes for breakfast. "Slow down, Princess," Flynn said, running a hand through his sleep-mussed hair. "Miss Grace just woke up. Give her a chance to have some coffee first." "Actually, I've been up for a while," Grace admitted, already looking more rested than she had the day before. "I was answering emails in my room." "Before coffee?" Flynn asked, incredulous. "That should be against the law." Grace laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that transformed her face. "Some habits are hard to break. I'm usually at the office by 6. "Well, not today," Flynn declared, moving to the coffee maker. "Today you're having a proper breakfast before you even think about work." To his surprise, Grace didn't protest. Instead, she rolled up her sleeves and helped Maddie gather ingredients for pancakes, falling easily into the rhythm they'd established during her previous brief stay. Over breakfast, Flynn explained to Maddie that Grace would be staying with them for a little while. "Miss Grace needs a safe place to stay while some people help her with the mean man problem," he said, simplifying the situation for his daughter's benefit. Maddie nodded sagely. "Our house is very safe. Daddy checks all the locks every night and we have a baseball bat in the closet." Grace raised an eyebrow at Flynn, who shrugged. "Home security, single dad style." After breakfast, Flynn helped Grace set up a workstation in the guest room, moving in a small desk from the storage shed and making sure the Wi-Fi password worked for her devices. "I insist on contributing to household expenses while I'm here," Grace said, as Flynn arranged the furniture. "And before you argue, consider it not charity but fairness." Flynn hesitated. While his pride bristled at accepting money, he couldn't deny that another adult in the house would increase utilities and grocery costs his budget was already stretched to cover. "We can figure something out," he conceded, "but I don't want rent. How about I handle groceries?" Grace suggested. "And maybe take you both out for dinner sometimes as a thank you." This seemed like a reasonable compromise, and Flynn agreed. With the practical matters settled, Grace turned to her laptop. Transforming before his eyes into the CEO, she was back straight, eyes focused, fingers flying over the keyboard as she dialed into a video conference. Flynn quietly excused himself, heading off to drop Maddie at school before going to work. As he drove, he wondered how their unusual arrangement would unfold. Having another adult in the house, especially one as accomplished and attractive as Grace, would take some adjustment. Over the next few days, they settled into a surprisingly comfortable routine. Grace worked remotely when possible, attending in-person meetings only when necessary and always with security. Flynn continued his regular schedule at the construction company, and Maddie delighted in having Grace present for morning pancakes and evening stories. On Friday evening, a week after Grace had moved in, Flynn arrived home to find his kitchen transformed. Delicious smells wafted through the house, and Maddie was perched on her step stool at the counter, carefully tearing lettuce leaves under Grace's supervision. "We're making dinner, Daddy," Maddie announced proudly. "Miss Grace is teaching me how to cook fancy food." "It's just pasta with a simple sauce," Grace demurred, looking slightly embarrassed. "I thought it would be nice to have dinner ready when you got home." Flynn was touched by the gesture. "It smells amazing." As they ate dinner together, Flynn noticed how much more relaxed Grace had become in just a week. The dark circles under her eyes had faded, and she laughed easily at Maddie's stories about school. "How's work going?" he asked as Maddie carried her plate to the sink. "Any progress with the situation?" Grace's expression sobered. "Some. The police are taking things more seriously now that I've documented the pattern of behavior, and my legal team is building a stronger case for a more comprehensive restraining order." "Has he tried to contact you here?" Grace shook her head. "No, and that's the strange part. It's almost as if he's gone underground. No messages, no sightings, nothing since I started staying here, she frowned. Which is either very good or very concerning. Let's hope for very good, Flynn said, not wanting to dwell on the alternative. After dinner, they settled in the living room, Maddie with her coloring books, Flynn with a novel he'd been trying to finish for months, and Grace with a stack of reports she needed to review. The domesticity of the scene struck Flynn as both strange and oddly right, as if Grace had always been part of their small family unit. When Maddie's bedtime arrived, she insisted that both Flynn and Grace participate in the ritual of stories and tucking in. Miss Grace does the voices better, Maddie declared as Flynn reached for their current bedtime book. Is that so? Flynn asked, pretending to be offended while handing the book to Grace. Well, I guess I'll just have to up my game. Grace accepted the book with a smile, settling beside Maddie on the bed while Flynn sat at the foot. As she read, giving each character a distinct voice that had Maddie giggling, Flynn found himself watching Grace more than listening to the story. The tenderness in her expression as she read to his daughter created a warmth in his chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time. Later, after Maddie had fallen asleep and they had returned to the living room, Grace closed her laptop with a decisive click. I've been thinking, she said, turning to face Flynn. Sounds dangerous, he teased. She smiled, but her eyes remained serious. I've imposed on your hospitality for a week now, and while I can't tell you how grateful I am, I'm also aware that this arrangement can't continue indefinitely. Flynn felt a surprising pang of disappointment. Are you planning to leave? Not immediately, Grace assured him, but I need a long-term solution. I can't hide forever, and you and Maddie deserve your normal life back. It hasn't been an imposition, Flynn said truthfully. Actually, it's been. He hesitated, searching for the right word. Nice having you here, Grace's expression softened. It's been nice for me too, more than nice. But we both know this isn't real life. You're helping me through a crisis, and I'm grateful, but eventually the crisis will pass. Flynn wanted to argue that what was happening between them, the comfortable meals, the shared laughter, the way Maddie looked up to her felt very real, but he held back. Grace was right. Their worlds were fundamentally different, and once her stalker problem was resolved, she would return to her executive life, and he and Maddie would go back to their quiet routine. So what's your plan? He asked instead. My security team is vetting a new apartment in a building with restricted access and 24-hour security, Grace explained. It should be ready in another week or two. And in the meantime, the police have stepped up their investigation. There's reason to believe they might actually have enough to charge Daniel soon. Flynn nodded, trying to ignore his mixed feelings about her eventual departure. That's good news. It is, Grace agreed, though I have to admit part of me will miss this. She gestured around the modest living room. The simplicity, the realness of it. You're welcome to visit anytime, Flynn said. Maddie would love that. And you? Grace asked quietly, her eyes meeting his. The question hung between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Flynn was acutely aware that his answer mattered more than it should. I'd like that too, he admitted, his voice lower than he intended. Something shifted in Grace's expression, a softening, a vulnerability that made her look less like a CEO and more like a woman who might be developing feelings for a construction supervisor with a 7-year-old daughter. The moment was interrupted by Flynn's phone ringing. He checked the caller ID his mother and answered reluctantly. Mom, everything okay? His mother's voice came through, concerned but not panicked. Everything's fine, dear. I just wanted to remind you that I can't take Maddie this Saturday. I have that doctor's appointment, remember? Flynn closed his eyes briefly. He'd completely forgotten. Write the appointment, no problem, Mom. I'll figure something out. After reassuring his mother and ending the call, Flynn turned back to Grace with an apologetic smile. Sorry about that, just a childcare hiccup for Saturday. Problem. Grace asked. Flynn shrugged. I'm supposed to be on site for a concrete pour. It's a big job and I really should be there, but my mother can't watch Maddie like she usually does. I could watch her, Grace offered without hesitation. Flynn blinked in surprise. But don't you have work? It's Saturday, Grace pointed out. And while I typically do work weekends, I can certainly take one day to help out the man who's sheltering me from a stalker. Flynn considered her offer. On one hand, Grace was certainly capable of looking after Maddie for a few hours. On the other hand, it felt like crossing another line in their already complicated relationship. "Are you sure?" he asked finally. "Maddie can be a handful, and if you need to work." "Flynn," Grace said firmly, "I run a tech company with over 300 employees. I think I can handle one 7-year-old for a day." Her expression softened. "Besides, Maddie and I get along well. We could have a girls' day, maybe bake cookies or do craft projects." The image of Grace, CEO of Lawson Tech Solutions, making cookies with his daughter made Flynn smile. "If you're absolutely sure, that would be a huge help." "Consider it settled," Grace said with a decisive nod. "Now, tell me more about this construction project. You mentioned a concrete pour." Flynn found himself explaining the commercial building his company was working on, surprised by Grace's genuine interest and intelligent questions. Before he knew it, an hour had passed in comfortable conversation that ranged from construction techniques to Grace's latest software development projects. When they finally said goodnight, Flynn found himself lingering in the hallway between their rooms. "Thank you," he said simply. "Not just for Saturday, but for fitting in here. Maddie adores you." Grace's smile was soft in the dim light. "She's easy to adore back. You've raised an amazing daughter, Flynn." "Good night, Grace. Good night." As Flynn closed his bedroom door, he acknowledged to himself that whatever was developing between them was more than gratitude or convenience. And judging by the look in Grace's eyes as they'd said goodnight, she might be realizing the same thing. Saturday morning, Flynn left for work with mixed feelings. He was confident that Grace could handle Maddie, but leaving them alone together for the first time still made him slightly nervous. "Call if you need anything," he told Grace as he prepared to leave. "And remember, no sugar after 4 p.m. or she'll never sleep tonight." Grace nodded seriously, but her eyes were amused. "Noted, no sugar after 4, no scary movies, no teaching her to drive the car." Flynn laughed. "Very funny. Just remember she can be very persuasive when she wants something." "I negotiate multi-million-dollar contracts for a living," Grace reminded him. "I think I can handle a second grader's persuasion tactics." "That's what you think now," Flynn warned with a grin. When he returned home that afternoon, tired and dusty from the construction site, he was greeted by the sound of giggling from the kitchen. Following the noise, he found Grace and Maddie at the counter, both wearing aprons and covered in what appeared to be flour. "Daddy." Maddie exclaimed when she spotted him. "We made cookies and a cake and spaghetti for dinner." "I see that," Flynn said, taking in the chaos of the normally tidy kitchen. "It looks like you had fun." "So much fun," Maddie confirmed. "Miss Grace let me use the mixer all by myself, and we went to the fancy grocery store and we painted my nails, see?" She held up small fingers adorned with sparkly purple polish. Flynn looked at Grace, who shrugged apologetically. "We might have gone a little overboard on the activities. But in my defense, your daughter is very persuasive." "Told you," Flynn said with a laugh. "Don't worry," Grace assured him, wiping flour from her cheek and somehow managing to look elegant despite the mess. "We'll clean everything up before dinner." "I'm not worried about the mess," Flynn said honestly. "I'm just glad you two had a good day." And he was. Seeing Grace and Maddie together, flour-covered and happy, filled him with a contentment he hadn't expected. It was easy to imagine more days like this, the three of them building a life together, sharing meals and laughter and everyday moments. The thought should have alarmed him. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. That evening, after Maddie had been tucked in, exhausted from her day of activities, Flynn and Grace sat on the back porch with glasses of wine. The spring evening was cool but pleasant, with stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Thank you for today," Flynn said, breaking the comfortable silence. Maddie had a blast. Grace smiled, watching the wind rustle the leaves of the maple tree in the small backyard. "So did I. It's been a long time since I just played and baked and didn't think about work or..." She trailed off. "Or your stalker," Flynn finished gently. She nodded. "I almost forgot about all of that today. It was just normal, wonderful." Flynn studied her profile in the fading light. You deserve normal and wonderful, Grace." She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the soft glow from the kitchen window behind them. "Do I? Sometimes I wonder if I've spent so long being CEO Grace Lawson that I've forgotten how to just be Grace." "You're both," Flynn said simply, "and both versions of you are pretty remarkable." Grace's expression softened, and for a moment Flynn thought she might lean toward him. Instead, she took a sip of her wine. "What about you? Do you ever feel like you're playing a role rather than being yourself?" Flynn considered the question. "Sometimes. Responsible single dad isn't always who I feel like being. There are days I want to be irresponsible or selfish or just different, but you don't," Grace observed. "No," he agreed, "because Maddie needs consistency. She needs to know dad is always dad, even on the tough days." Grace was quiet for a moment. "You're a good father, Flynn, the kind I wish I'd had." The simple statement, delivered so quietly, revealed more than she probably intended. Flynn remembered her mentioning her father's death, but she'd never shared details about their relationship. "Was your dad?" Flynn began carefully. "Present but absent," Grace supplied. "Always working, always focused on the company. I followed in his footsteps because I thought it would finally make him proud, finally make him see me." She shrugged, a small, sad gesture. "Then he died before I could find out if it worked." Flynn resisted the urge to take her hand, sensing she wasn't looking for comfort so much as understanding. "That must have been difficult." "It was," Grace acknowledged. "Still is sometimes. Especially when I wonder if I'm running his company the way he would have wanted, or if I'm just chasing approval I'll never get." "Maybe the question isn't what he would have wanted," Flynn suggested gently. "Maybe it's what you want." Grace looked at him with surprise, as if this thought had never occurred to her. "What I want," she repeated slowly, testing the idea. "Just a thought," Flynn said, not wanting to overstep. They lapsed into silence again, but it was a thoughtful silence rather than an awkward one. Flynn found himself acutely aware of Grace's presence, beside him the subtle scent of her perfume mingling with the lingering smell of baking, the way she occasionally tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. "Would it be inappropriate if I asked you something personal?" Grace said suddenly. Flynn raised an eyebrow. "We've been sharing a house for over a week. I think we're past worrying about inappropriate questions." Grace smiled slightly. "Fair point. I was wondering about Maddie's mother. You mentioned she left when Maddie was 2, but you've never really talked about her." Flynn took a deeper sip of his wine. "Not much to tell. We were young. I was 23, Allison was 22. The pregnancy wasn't planned, but we decided to make it work. Got married, tried to be a family." He shrugged. "Allison realized pretty quickly that she wasn't cut out for motherhood or marriage. When Maddie was 2, she told me she needed to find herself, and that was that." "She doesn't see Maddie at all?" Grace asked, her tone carefully neutral. Flynn shook his head. "Birthday cards sometimes. A phone call at Christmas. She moved to California, has a new husband, new life. Maddie doesn't really remember her." "I'm sorry," Grace said quietly. "That must have been incredibly difficult for you." "It was at first," Flynn admitted. "I was angry for a long time at Allison, at myself for choosing wrong, at the universe for giving Maddie a mother who didn't want to be one." He set down his wine glass. "But eventually, I realized that anger wasn't helping anyone, especially not Maddie. So I focused on being the best dad I could be, building a stable life for her." "You've done an amazing job," Grace said, her admiration evident. "Maddie is happy, well-adjusted, secure. That's no small feat as a single parent." Flynn felt warmth spread through him at her praise. "What about you?" he asked. "You mentioned not having kids, but was there ever someone who came close to being the right partner, I mean?" Grace considered the question. "There was someone about 5 years ago, James. We were together for nearly 3 years, even talked about marriage." She sighed. "But when my father died and I took over Lawson Tech, everything changed. My hours, my priorities, my focus. James said he understood, but he didn't," Flynn guessed. "No," Grace confirmed. "He wanted the girlfriend who could take spontaneous trips and spend lazy Sundays in bed." CEO Grace Lawson, with her 80-hour work weeks and constant emergencies, wasn't what he signed up for. Her smile was tinged with old hurt. "The irony is, I probably would have married him if he'd asked, would have tried to be the woman he wanted." "And been miserable," Flynn observed. Grace looked surprised, then thoughtful. Yes, I would have been. She turned to face him more fully. How did you know that? Flynn shrugged. Just a guess. You don't strike me as someone who could be happy pretending to be less than who you are. The way Grace looked at him then with wonder and a kind of dawning recognition made Flynn's heart beat faster. It was as if she was truly seeing him for the first time, not just as the kind construction worker who had offered her shelter, but as a man who understood her in ways others hadn't bothered to try. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Flynn found himself leaning slightly toward her, drawn by the openness in her expression. Grace's phone buzzed loudly on the table between them, breaking the spell. She glanced at the screen and frowned. Work? Flynn asked, trying to ignore his disappointment at the interruption. No, Grace said, her voice suddenly tense. It's my security team. There's been an incident. Flynn straightened, instantly alert. What kind of incident? Grace read the message, her expression growing more troubled. Daniel was caught trying to access my office after hours. Security detained him. Police were called. She looked up at Flynn, her eyes wide. They found a knife in his bag. The implication hung in the air between them. This wasn't just harassment anymore, it was potentially something much more dangerous. Was anyone hurt? Flynn asked, already thinking about what this might mean for their safety. Grace shook her head. No, he didn't get past the lobby security, but this changes things. She stood up, suddenly all business. I need to call my head of security and the police detective handling the case. Flynn watched as she walked inside, phone already pressed to her ear. The warmth and intimacy of their conversation had vanished, replaced by the stark reality of Grace's situation. Later that night, after Grace had made numerous calls and sent countless emails, they reconvened in the living room. Her face was drawn with worry and exhaustion. They're holding him for now, she explained, sinking onto the couch beside Flynn. But I don't know for how long. This is the first time he's done something that clearly crosses the line into criminal behavior. What does this mean for you? Flynn asked. For your plans? Grace ran a hand through her hair, a gesture he now recognized as a sign of stress. My security team thinks I should stay here a while longer if that's okay with you. This house is still the safest option since Daniel has no way of connecting me to you. Of course you can stay, Flynn said without hesitation. As long as you need. Grace's relief was visible. Thank you. I'll continue to have security for transportation to and from work, and they'll increase patrols around the office. Flynn nodded, then asked the question that had been nagging at him. What about Maddie? Does this put her at risk? No, Grace said firmly. There's absolutely no way Daniel could know about you or Maddie. I've been extremely careful about that. She reached out impulsively and squeezed his hand. I would never knowingly put your daughter in danger, Flynn. If I thought there was any risk to her, I would leave immediately. Flynn believed her. Despite the short time they'd known each other, he trusted Grace's judgment and her integrity. Okay, then we continue as we have been. There is one change, Grace said, looking slightly uncomfortable. The police detective wants to interview me tomorrow morning. I was hoping you might come with me as a sort of witness to how this has been affecting me. Flynn was surprised by the request. Me. Wouldn't your assistant or someone from work be better? Grace shook her head. You're the one who's seen me outside of work, who's observed how this situation has impacted my daily life. The detective specifically said having someone who could speak to my state of mind would be helpful. Flynn considered this. Going to the police station with Grace would make their connection more official, more public. It would be a step beyond simply offering her a safe place to stay. But the vulnerability in her eyes as she waited for his answer made the decision easy. Of course I'll come, he said. What time? The relief on Grace's face was worth any potential complication. 10 o'clock, and Flynn, thank you for everything. The next morning, Flynn arranged for his mother to watch Maddie while he accompanied Grace to the police station. He dressed more formally than usual, wearing the button-down shirt and slacks he usually reserved for parent-teacher conferences and important meetings. Grace, in contrast, was dressed in full CEO mode, a tailored pantsuit, subtle but expensive jewelry, hair arranged in a sleek-up doe. The transformation was striking, reminding Flynn of the vast differences in their daily worlds. At the police station, They were shown to an interview room where a detective was waiting a serious-looking woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Detective Martinez. "Miss Lawson, thank you for coming in," she said, gesturing for them to sit. "And you must be Mr. Baker. I understand you've been providing Miss Lawson with a safe place to stay." Flynn nodded, suddenly aware of how this might sound to an outsider, a wealthy CEO staying with a construction supervisor she'd only known for a few weeks. Detective Martinez seemed to sense his discomfort. "Mr. Baker was the witness to the parking garage incident that started this escalation, correct?" "Yes," Grace confirmed. "Flynn and his daughter happened to be there when Daniel chased me. They gave me a ride to the police station that night." The detective nodded, making a note in her file. "And since then, you've been staying at Mr. Baker's residence?" "Not the entire time," Grace clarified. "Initially, I tried staying at hotels with security, but after several weeks of that proving both ineffective and unsustainable, I accepted Flynn's offer of his guest room." Flynn watched as Grace explained the timeline of events, impressed by her clarity and composure. She detailed Daniel's pattern of behavior, the messages, the accidental appearances at her regular locations, the escalating nature of the harassment with the precision of someone presenting a business case. When asked about the most recent incident with the knife, however, her composure faltered slightly. "I don't know what he intended to do if he had reached my office," she admitted, her voice less steady. "But given the progression of his behavior, I'm genuinely afraid for my safety." Detective Martinez turned to Flynn. "Mr. Baker, you've been living with Miss Lawson for how long now?" "Almost 2 weeks," Flynn answered. "And during that time, what have you observed about her state of mind, her level of fear regarding this situation?" Flynn thought carefully before answering. "When Grace first came to stay with us, she was exhausted, jumpy, checking over her shoulder constantly. She's been having trouble sleeping, working excessive hours because it's easier than dealing with the fear." He glanced at Grace, whose eyes were fixed on the table. "It's only in the past few days that she started to relax a little, to seem more like herself." The detective nodded. "And you believe her fears are justified? This isn't an overreaction?" "Absolutely not," Flynn said firmly. "I saw how Daniel was pursuing her that night in the parking garage. His intention was clear, and it wasn't just to talk. Grace has been dealing with this for months with remarkable restraint and professionalism. If anything, I think she's downplayed the seriousness of the situation for too long." Grace looked up at him, surprise and gratitude in her expression. Detective Martinez made another note, then closed her file. "Based on the evidence we've gathered, including the knife found in Mr. Ellison's possession and the security footage from your office building, we believe we have grounds to hold him pending formal charges," she informed them. "The district attorney will make the final determination, but I expect charges of stalking, attempted breaking and entering, and possibly attempted assault with a deadly weapon." Grace's relief was palpable. "How long will he be held?" "That depends on several factors, including whether the judge grants bail. But given the evidence and the escalating pattern, I'd be surprised if he's released anytime soon." The detective's expression softened slightly. "You should continue your security precautions, Miss Lawson, but I believe the immediate threat has been significantly reduced." As they left the police station, Flynn could sense Grace processing everything they'd heard. She walked silently beside him, her professional mask firmly in place until they reached his truck. Once inside the vehicle, Grace leaned back against the headrest and closed her eyes. "I can't believe this might actually be over," she said quietly. Flynn reached over and squeezed her hand briefly. "You did great in there." The detective clearly took the situation seriously. Grace opened her eyes and turned to look at him. "Because of you, the way you described what you've observed, it made everything real in a way my statements alone couldn't." Flynn shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just told the truth." "Still," Grace insisted, "thank you for coming with me, for supporting me through all of this." She hesitated, then added, "I'm not sure what happens next." The question hung between them, not just about Daniel and the legal proceedings, but about them. About whatever had been growing between them over these weeks of shared meals and conversations, of watching Maddie together and finding unexpected connection. Let's take it one day at a time, Flynn suggested gently. Daniel's in custody, you're safe, that's what matters right now. Grace nodded, though something like disappointment flickered across her face. One day at a time, you're right. As they drove back to Flynn's house, he found himself wondering what he wanted to happen next. Part of him, a growing part, wanted Grace to stay, not because she needed protection, but because she wanted to be with him and Maddie. But the rational side of his mind recognized the obstacles. Their different worlds, the complications of introducing someone new into Maddie's life, the fact that Grace's presence in his home had been born of necessity rather than choice. The next few days brought a strange limbo to their household. With Daniel in custody and formal charges pending, the immediate danger had passed. Grace resumed a more normal work schedule, though she continued to stay at Flynn's house as a precaution, as she put it. Flynn noticed subtle changes in her behavior. She seemed more relaxed, more present, less likely to jump at unexpected sounds or check her phone constantly for security alerts. She laughed more easily, especially with Maddie, and began contributing to their household beyond just financial support, taking on cooking duties several nights a week and helping with laundry on weekends. It was domestic, comfortable, and increasingly confusing for Flynn. The more Grace integrated into their lives, the harder it became to imagine her leaving, and the more he worried about what that would mean for Maddie when she inevitably did. On Friday evening, a little over a week after Daniel's arrest, Flynn came home to find Grace sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread around her laptop. Maddie was at a sleepover with a school friend, giving the house an unusual quiet. "Hey," Flynn greeted her, setting down his lunch cooler. "Working late," Grace looked up, pushing her reading glasses onto her head. "Just reviewing some contracts, nothing urgent," she gestured to a covered dish on the counter. "I made lasagna, yours is in the oven staying warm." "You didn't have to do that," Flynn said, though he was touched by the thoughtfulness. "I wanted to," Grace replied simply. "It's the least I can do." Flynn retrieved the plate from the oven and joined her at the table. "Any news about Daniel?" he asked, knowing she'd had a call with the prosecutor that afternoon. Grace nodded, setting aside her work. "The grand jury returned an indictment today. Multiple charges, including stalking and attempted assault. The prosecutor is confident he'll remain in custody until trial." "That's great news," Flynn said sincerely. "You must feel relieved." "I do," Grace agreed. "Though it's still strange to think it might really be over. I've been looking over my shoulder for so long now, it's hard to imagine not having to anymore." Flynn took a bite of the lasagna, which was delicious, and considered his next words carefully. "So what happens now? With your plans, I mean." Grace met his eyes, something vulnerable in her expression. "My security team has finished vetting the new apartment. It's ready whenever I am." She hesitated. "I should probably move in soon. I've imposed on you and Maddie long enough." Flynn set down his fork, suddenly not hungry despite the excellent food. "You're not imposing, Grace, you know that." "Still," she insisted, "this arrangement was meant to be temporary. A solution to an immediate problem. That problem is essentially resolved now." Flynn studied her, trying to read between the lines. "Is that what you want? To move to the new apartment?" Grace looked away, gathering her papers into a neat stack. "What I want is irrelevant. The practical reality is that I can't continue living in your guest room indefinitely." "That doesn't answer my question," Flynn pressed gently. Grace finally met his gaze again, and the conflict in her eyes was unmistakable. "No," she admitted quietly, "it's not what I want. But it's what makes sense." Flynn took a deep breath, knowing they had reached a crossroads. What if it doesn't have to make sense? What if, just this once, you did what you wanted instead of what seems practical? Grace stared at him, clearly caught off guard by his directness. "Flynn, we come from different worlds. You're a construction supervisor with a young daughter. I'm a CEO with a complicated life and a target on my back. How could that possibly work long-term? I don't know," Flynn answered honestly. "But I do know that these past weeks, having you here has felt right in a way few things have since Maddie's mother left. And I think you feel it too." Grace's expression softened. "I do," she admitted. "Being here with you and Maddie, it's shown me what I've been missing. What I didn't even know I wanted." Flynn reached across the table, taking her hand. So maybe we figure it out, together, one day at a time like we've been doing. And Maddie, Grace asked, concern evident in her voice. What if this doesn't work? She's already attached to me. I couldn't bear to hurt her. Maddie adores you, Flynn said. And yes, there's risk in that, but there's risk in everything worth having. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm not asking for promises or guarantees, just a chance to see where this could go. Grace was quiet for a long moment, and Flynn could almost see her methodical mind working through scenarios, weighing options, calculating risks. What would this look like? She finally asked. Practically speaking. Flynn smiled slightly at her need for specifics. Well, you could move into your new apartment, which I'm sure is much nicer than my guest room, but we could start dating properly. Dinners, movies, getting to know each other outside of this crisis situation. Dating, Grace repeated, as if testing the word. It's been a while since I did that. Me too, Flynn admitted. We might be terrible at it. That made Grace laugh, a genuine, unguarded sound that transformed her face and made Flynn's heart skip a beat. Or we might be surprisingly good at it. Only one way to find out, Flynn pointed out. Grace looked at their joined hands, then back at his face. What about tonight? She asked quietly. Maddie's at her sleepover. We could start now. The suggestion and the hint of vulnerability behind it touched something deep in Flynn. I'd like that, he said softly. They ended up on the back porch again, this time with a bottle of good wine Grace had ordered with the groceries. The spring evening was mild, the sky clear enough to see stars despite the city lights. Tell me something I don't know about you, Grace said, curled comfortably in one of the porch chairs. Something that isn't about being a dad or a construction supervisor. Flynn considered the question. I played guitar in a band in college. We were terrible, but it was fun. Grace's eyes widened. You play guitar? I had no idea. Used to, Flynn clarified. Haven't touched one in years, not since Maddie was born, really. He took a sip of his wine. What about you? Something that isn't about being a CEO or a tech genius. Grace smiled. I make really good pancakes. I already knew that, Flynn pointed out with a laugh. Fine, Grace conceded. I almost became a chef instead of going into tech. I even got accepted to culinary school before my father talked me into MIT instead. Flynn was genuinely surprised. That explains the amazing lasagna. Do you ever regret not pursuing that path? Grace considered the question seriously. Sometimes, especially on days when the corporate politics and pressure get overwhelming. She looked up at the stars. Cooking is creative, tangible. You make something with your hands, and at the end of the day, you know exactly what you've accomplished. Like construction, Flynn observed. Yes, exactly, Grace agreed, her expression warming. That's what I admire about what you do. At the end of the day, there's concrete evidence of your work, something real that wasn't there before. Flynn was touched by her understanding. Most people viewed construction as just manual labor, not seeing the satisfaction of creating something lasting. We're not so different after all, he said quietly. Grace's smile was soft in the dim porch light. Maybe not in the ways that matter. They talked for hours, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams they'd set aside, hopes for the future. As the night grew cooler, they moved closer together, Flynn eventually putting his arm around Grace when she shivered slightly. Cold? He asked. Grace shook her head, leaning into his warmth. Not anymore. Flynn looked down at her, struck by how natural this felt. Grace in his arms, their conversation flowing easily from serious to playful and back again. It was as if they'd known each other for years rather than weeks. I never expected this, Grace admitted softly. When you stopped to help me that night, I never imagined we'd end up here being. Flynn prompted gently. Grace turned her face up to his. Here being me, falling for the kind man who rescued me despite all the reasons I shouldn't. The simple honesty of her words took Flynn's breath away. I think I started falling the moment you made banana pancakes with Maddie, he confessed. Grace's eyes softened, and Flynn couldn't resist any longer. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. Instead, she met him halfway, her lips finding his in a kiss that was tentative at first, then increasingly confident. When they finally separated, Grace's eyes remained closed for a moment, as if savoring the sensation. When she opened them, the vulnerability and hope Flynn saw there matched his own feelings exactly. "So," she whispered, "dating. I think we might be pretty good at it after all." Flynn smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'd say we're off to a promising start." In the weeks that followed, they developed a new rhythm. Grace moved into her secure apartment downtown but spent many evenings and most weekends at Flynn's house with him and Maddie. They had proper dates dinners at restaurants where Grace was recognized, and Flynn felt slightly out of place, but also simple picnics in the park and movie nights at home. The first time Flynn visited Grace's new apartment, he was momentarily intimidated by its sleek luxury, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the state-of-the-art kitchen she rarely used, the sophisticated security system that required biometric authentication for entry. "It's beautiful," he said honestly, "but it doesn't feel like you." Grace looked around the impersonal space inside. "I know, it feels like CEO Grace Lawson's apartment, not." She hesitated. "Not just Grace's home," Flynn finished for her. She nodded, moving to stand beside him at the window. "I'm still learning how to be both the CEO and just Grace. For so long, they were the same thing." Flynn wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You're doing a pretty good job of figuring it out from where I'm standing." As their relationship developed, they faced the expected challenges of merging their different worlds. Flynn sometimes felt out of place at Grace's corporate events, where conversations revolved around tech innovations and stock prices. Grace occasionally struggled with the chaotic routine of family life, accustomed as she was to controlling her environment and schedule, but they learned from each other. Flynn gained confidence in navigating Grace's professional sphere, finding that his practical knowledge and straightforward perspective were often valued in rooms full of theoretical thinkers. Grace discovered the joy of impromptu ice cream trips and Saturday morning cartoons, of putting work aside to be fully present in the moment. Most importantly, Maddie thrived with Grace's presence in their lives. The little girl blossomed under the additional attention, developing an interest in both cooking and computers that Grace enthusiastically encouraged. Daniel's case progressed through the legal system, and while there were stressful days of depositions and court appearances, Grace faced them with Flynn's steady support. When the final verdict came guilty on all counts, with a significant prison sentence, the relief was profound for both of them. "It's really over," Grace said as they left the courthouse together. "I don't have to look over my shoulder anymore." Flynn squeezed her hand. "No more hiding." That night, after Maddie was asleep, they sat on the back porch as they had so many times before. The summer evening was warm, fireflies occasionally blinking in the small yard. "I've been thinking," Grace said, her tone casual though Flynn could sense an underlying nervousness. "My lease on the apartment is up next month." Flynn nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I was wondering how you'd feel about me not renewing it," she said, watching his face carefully. Flynn's heart quickened. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Grace took a deep breath. "I'm saying that I spend most of my time here anyway. That this house feels more like home than my apartment ever has. That I love you and Maddie and I want to be where you are." She hesitated. "If that's what you want too." Flynn reached for her hand, holding it tightly. "Grace, nothing would make me happier than having you here permanently." "But are you sure? This house is a far cry from your downtown apartment." "That's exactly why I want it," Grace said firmly. "I don't need floor-to-ceiling windows or fancy appliances. I need pancake breakfasts and bedtime stories and coming home to people who love me for more than what I can do for them." She squeezed his hand. "I need you and Maddie. The rest is just details." Flynn pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed by the certainty in her voice. "We need you too," he whispered against her hair. "More than I ever expected when I stopped to help a woman running from a stalker." Grace looked up at him, her eyes shining with emotion. "Best decision you ever made." "Second best," Flynn corrected with a smile. "The best was asking you to stay." 6 months later, as autumn painted the trees in shades of gold and crimson, Flynn stood in the backyard watching Grace help Maddie carve a pumpkin on the porch. The scene was so domestic, so natural, it was hard to remember a time when Grace hadn't been part of their family. The transition hadn't been without challenges. Grace still worked long hours sometimes, and Flynn occasionally felt insecure about the disparity in their financial situations. But they communicated openly, compromised when necessary, and remembered what had brought them together in the first place: mutual respect, shared values, and a love that had grown from the most unexpected of beginnings. Maddie had adjusted beautifully to having Grace in their daily lives, thriving with the additional attention and developing a special bond with the woman who made time to help with homework, attend school events, and teach her to make grandmother's special pancakes on weekend mornings. As Flynn watched them together, laughing over the messy pumpkin seeds, he reached into his pocket, feeling the small velvet box he'd been carrying for a week, waiting for the perfect moment. Tonight, after Maddie was asleep, he would ask Grace to make their family official to transform what had begun as temporary shelter into a permanent home. "Daddy, come see our pumpkin," Maddie called, waving him over excitedly. "Grace helped me make it look like our family." Flynn joined them on the porch, smiling at the somewhat lopsided carving that indeed showed 3 figures holding hands. "It's perfect," he declared, meeting Grace's eyes over Maddie's head. Grace smiled back at him, love and contentment clear in her expression. "Yes," she agreed softly. "It really is." The ring in Flynn's pocket seemed to grow warmer, a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Tonight, he would ask the question he already knew the answer to, because sometimes the most unexpected journeys led exactly where you were meant to be all along. As the sun set on their small backyard, Flynn wrapped an arm around Grace's shoulders, the other around Maddie, holding his whole world in a single embrace. From crisis to comfort, from danger to domestic bliss, their story had unfolded in ways none of them could have predicted that fateful night in a parking garage. "I love you," Flynn whispered in Grace's ear as Maddie ran to fetch candles for their pumpkin. "I love you too," Grace replied, leaning into his embrace. "Our poor dad and his CEO, who would have thought?" Flynn chuckled. "Sometimes the best stories start with a chance encounter and a split-second decision, and end with forever," Grace added softly. As Maddie returned with candles and matches, Flynn knew with absolute certainty that Grace was right. Their story wasn't ending, it was just beginning a new chapter, one filled with pancake breakfasts and bedtime stories, with challenges overcome together, and a love that had found its way against all odds, and he wouldn't have it any other way.